In 1993, there were two big weddings in my family. One of them was my brother's, to the woman he had been living with for 8 years. The other one was mine. Well, not me, Miriam, but my character in an online game called Dragons, Legends, and Lore. This came about because of the way the internet was in 1993. This is before the first web browser, before there were really websites, and the net consisted almost entirely of email and mailing lists and Usenet newsgroups, and about 95% of the users were men or drooling nerd boys. My friend Karen and I decided that we would write a survival guide for women to the online world. And we knew quite a lot about mailing lists and Usenet, but there was this other area we didn't know anything about, but we had heard about, called MUDs, which stood for multi-user dimensions or multi-user dungeons. And these were online games. And I volunteered to do some research. Well, I went and I looked through the names of the various MUDs that were out there, and I chose one that appealed to me. So that's how I ended up on Dragons, Legends, and Lore, or DLL. I was hooked almost from the beginning. I had maybe been on the game about half an hour when one of the gods who ran it swooped down next to me on a black dragon, dismounted, and handed me a ring. Well, I should explain, the character that I had created, I had named Superwoman, because I had read too many comics growing up and I didn't really have that great an imagination. And I could write a great description complete with blue leotard and tights and red boots and cape and the yellow S on the chest. And the ring the god handed me, he had labeled an anti-kryptonite ring. I was charmed by the whole thing. The men in my real life tended to show up with wilting roses, and, well, they didn't actually even come to the door. They usually just honked the horn of a beat-up Honda Civic. And, I decided I liked the romance of this atmosphere. Well, most of the game had very little to do with romance. It was basically about fighting various types of monsters, and you needed to do that with different skills and in groups. I had made Superwoman a magic user because, well, what else would she be? And I would team up with stronger warriors or agile thieves to go and defeat various types of creatures. Well, in the process of doing this, I made a number of friends, and it turned out that most of the people I got friendly with were all members of a castle. That was really significant because you had to belong to a castle in order to be allowed to kill other players on DLL. And I was reluctant to do that part of it, but I really liked all these people in Castle Perilous, and so I joined it. And I grew particularly close to one other person there who was a thief named Jamie. Jamie was clever and charming, and we soon developed in a close relationship that after you fight monsters, you need to spend a lot of time healing, and that healing time we spent talking. And it didn't really matter that in real life he was about 10 years younger than me and was married, and I, despite all of the guys in their Honda Civics, was in a sort of relationship. It was a long-distance relationship that we referred to as the world's longest-running, brief, meaningless fling. And, well, I refer to it that way, and the fact that he didn't think that was funny was probably why it was just staying as a brief, meaningless fling. And I went out on lots of first dates with other guys who would tend to announce things like, well, you should know that I was arrested yesterday. Or I've decided that, I hadn't been dating for a while, but I've decided that I want to have children, and it occurred to me that I need to find a wife first. So my real life love situation was not entirely satisfying. And with Jamie, there were no strings attached. I knew he was married. I knew he wasn't really somebody I wanted to be involved with, but it was entertaining. And so eventually we decided we should get married on the mud. We planned a very elaborate ceremony. This was the time when there were stories about a particular celebrity pair who wore sample vials of each other's blood around their necks. And we went one step further. Because you would get reincarnated whenever you died in the mud, we created a ceremony in which, at the end of the ceremony, we literally tore each other's hearts out and ate them. But then we were reincarnated and it was all fine. So that was the second great wedding in my family in 1993. As time went on, I learned that a few more things about Jamie that maybe made it a good thing that our relationship was online only. It turns out that it was not entirely a coincidence that he had chosen to make his character a thief. In fact, he was out on parole from a prison in Indiana, and there was some indications that he hadn't entirely abandoned that life in real life. But, the game was fun. What difference did it make? Well, a few months after this great wedding, everything came to an end because it turned out that the person who was running the game was running it off of his work computer at a defense contractor. He was fired from his job and the game shut down. Several of us went to play on another game for a while, but it just wasn't quite the same as DLL had been, and Jamie apparently ended up back in prison and didn't follow us over to the other mud. But, it was still, there's times when I look back at those days and I think there was a time when the internet was more about romance and fantasy than it was about flaming and politics. And I look back nostalgically on that and my days in Castle Perilous with Jamie the Thief. Thank you.